I walked into the upscale restaurant with quiet confidence, my black suit tailored perfectly to my frame. It was a Friday evening, and the restaurant buzzed with the soft hum of high-end patrons enjoying their meals, the clink of wine glasses, and the occasional laughter. I had a reservation, a VIP reservation, but no one here knew who I was. The host, a young woman with blonde hair, greeted me with a forced smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any tables available," she said, holding her hands up in a feigned gesture of apology. My reservation was already confirmed, but her cold dismissal sent a chill through my spine. I looked past her, noticing a group of well-dressed individuals sitting comfortably at tables by the window, while I was left standing in the middle of the foyer as if I didn't belong. "Excuse me?" I said calmly, pulling out my phone to show the reservation confirmation. But she barely glanced at it before responding, "No tables left, ma'am. Perhaps you'd like to try another time." The frustration bubbled beneath my surface, but I kept it in check. "No. I have a table, and I'm not leaving without it." She smiled smugly, and I knew I was being judged. She didn't think I belonged here. What happened next would change everything, but not in the way she expected. The tension was palpable. This was more than just a seating issue. This was about respect. It was about being seen, truly seen, and I was done being invisible. "Call your manager," I said, my voice steady yet cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. The tension in the room was palpable as I sat there, watching the chaos unfold. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, the staff scrambling, the customers whispering among themselves. The restaurant, once a place of elegance and grace, now felt like a courtroom. The manager, clearly flustered, tried to regain some sense of control, but it was too late. His earlier arrogance was quickly replaced with a nervous unease as the truth of who I was settled in. He stuttered, attempting to apologize, but I didn't respond. I let the silence hang between us, knowing full well the power I now held in this moment. The restaurant had just lost its reputation, and it was going to cost more than just their jobs. I wasn't here to demand an apology. I was here to make a point. I had endured far too many moments like this in my life, moments where I was dismissed, belittled, and reduced to a stereotype. It was time to show them that I was not someone to be underestimated, not someone they could treat this way and get away with it. The manager's face turned a shade paler as he realized the full scope of his mistake. I leaned forward, looking him directly in the eyes. "You thought I didn't belong here," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the air like a blade. "But now you're going to learn just how wrong you were." I could see the moment his mind started to process what I had said, but it was too late to take back the words. The damage had been done. His actions, his dismissal of me based on nothing more than my appearance, had set a chain of events in motion that couldn't be undone. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. The people around me, the other customers, started to take notice. They were no longer just passive observers to the situation. They were beginning to see it for what it truly was, an act of racial discrimination. The atmosphere in the restaurant, once filled with polite chatter and the clinking of glasses, now buzzed with the electric tension of what was unfolding before them. I could feel the weight of their judgment, but it wasn't the same as before. This time, it wasn't me being judged. It was them. I stood up slowly, not in anger, but with purpose. The manager opened his mouth to speak again, probably to offer some form of apology, but I raised my hand, silencing him. "I don't need your apology," I said firmly. "What I need is for you to understand the consequences of what you've done." The employees behind the counter exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what was coming next. The moment of reckoning had arrived. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my assistant, activating the internal protocol I had in place for situations just like this. It was time to put the system to work. "Call your team," I said to the manager. "You're going to need them." The manager's face twisted in confusion, but before he could ask any questions, the restaurant's security team arrived. They stood in the doorway, waiting for orders, eyes scanning the room. "I want everyone involved in this situation to meet me in the back," I instructed. Now, the security guards moved quickly, their presence making the tension in the air even more palpable. The manager's hands trembled as he led the way to the back office. As we passed the staff, I could hear the murmurs of disbelief. It was clear that the atmosphere had shifted, and not just because of my presence. It was because they were beginning to realize the consequences of their actions. As we reached the back office, I stood tall, my posture unwavering. I turned to the manager, who was still trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. "I'm going to do something now," I said, "and it's going to change everything for you, for your staff, for this place." The manager swallowed hard, but he didn't speak. He knew there was nothing left to say. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to yell. The power of the truth was enough. I wasn't just a customer who had been wronged. I was the one who would rewrite the rules of this place, and I would do it on my terms. As I stood in the back office, I could feel the weight of the moment. The manager stood nervously in front of me, his eyes darting from side to side as the realization of what was happening began to sink in. He had no idea who he was dealing with, but that was about to change. I didn't need to scream to cause a scene. What I was about to do would speak for itself. I turned to him and said, "You thought I was just another customer who could be dismissed, who could be treated this way. But I am not just another person. I am the one who owns this restaurant. I built it from the ground up, and I will not let people like you continue to run it into the ground." His face turned white as the words hit him, and for a moment, I could see the panic creeping into his eyes. But I wasn't interested in his fear. I was interested in making sure this never happened again. Do you know how many people just like me have been treated this way in this place? People who deserve the same respect as anyone else but are cast aside because of their appearance? I've been through this too many times, I continued, my voice steady but unwavering. The manager opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off before he could speak. "No, don't bother," I said, holding up my hand. "Your words won't fix this. What will fix this is the action I'm about to take." I pulled out my phone again and sent a quick text. The internal protocol I had put in place to handle situations like this now fully activated. "I want everyone involved in this situation to meet me here, in this office." Immediately, I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. The manager, his hands shaking, nodded and stepped out of the office, the door closing behind him with a soft click. I took a deep breath and glanced around the room, making sure my thoughts were clear. When I turned back to face the others, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. It was no longer about a simple mistake or misunderstanding. This was about power and accountability. This was about a system that needed to be changed. One by one, the staff members filed into the office, each with their own look of confusion and fear. They had no idea what was coming next, but I wasn't about to let them off the hook. I looked each of them in the eye as they entered, making sure they understood what this was about. "You all have no idea what it feels like to be on the other side of this," I said, my voice calm but piercing. "But you're about to understand. This is bigger than you, bigger than this restaurant. This is about something much more important." The tension in the room grew as I continued. "I'm not here to make an example out of you, but I will hold each and every one of you accountable. You will never treat anyone this way again, not under my watch. Do you understand?" There was a collective murmur of agreement, but none of them dared to look me in the eye. I could see the regret in their expressions, but it was too late for apologies. The damage had been done, and now it was time for consequences. "I've made my decision," I said firmly. "Effective immediately, I am firing the staff members who were involved in this incident. Your actions have shown me that you do not understand the values this place was built on. As of now, you are no longer part of this restaurant." The silence that followed was deafening. The staff members shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. But I stood my ground, not backing down. This wasn't about personal grudges. This was about making sure that the culture of this restaurant, of this company, reflected the values of respect and fairness that I held so dear. "I don't take this lightly," I added, my voice quiet but filled with authority. "But I will not allow this kind of behavior to continue. Not in my company, not in my space." I watched as the staff members began to leave, their heads down, their bodies slumped. The manager, his face pale, barely managed to say, I understand, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The message had been sent, loud and clear. The next day, an internal review of the restaurant's policies began, and I made it clear to the entire staff that from now on, we would have zero tolerance for any form of discrimination. Every employee, from the servers to the managers, would go through mandatory diversity and inclusion training, and I would personally oversee the process. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about creating a culture of respect and fairness that would last. The ripple effect of what happened that day would continue to shape the future of my company, but more importantly, it would send a clear message to anyone who thought they could mistreat others based on their race, gender, or appearance. You will be held accountable, and you will never, ever be allowed to forget it. The next morning, as the sun streamed through the large windows of my office, I couldn't help but reflect on what had transpired the day before. The weight of the decision to fire the staff still lingered, but I knew it was necessary. I had been through too much in my life to let this moment slip by without action. The restaurant had always been a symbol of success, but yesterday it had been a reminder of how deep discrimination runs, even in the most refined places. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window, gazing out at the city. It was a beautiful day, but I could feel the storm still brewing inside me. I was not just a business owner. I was a symbol of resilience. I had worked too hard to let this moment define me, but I was determined to make it a turning point, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked or dismissed. My phone buzzed on my desk, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from my assistant, confirming that the internal review of the restaurant's policies was set to begin that morning. The staff involved in the incident had been informed, and the necessary actions were already in motion. I had also received a few calls from other business owners who had heard about what happened and wanted to discuss how they could improve their own company cultures. I smiled to myself. Change was coming, and it was starting with me. As I made my way down to the restaurant, I could feel the nervous energy in the air. The staff who remained were all gathered in the main dining area, awaiting the meeting I had called. They had all been informed of the mandatory diversity and inclusion training that would begin immediately. The atmosphere was tense, but I knew this was necessary to set the tone moving forward. I entered the room, and all eyes turned to me. I could feel their anticipation, but I wasn't going to soften my message. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to make a lasting change. Thank you for joining me today, I began, my voice calm but firm. I'm sure many of you are wondering why we're here. The events of yesterday have shown me that we have a long way to go in creating a truly inclusive environment here. This restaurant, this company, is built on the principles of respect, fairness, and hard work, but we've lost sight of that. Yesterday's incident was a reflection of a much bigger issue that needs to be addressed, not just with words, but with real action. I paused, letting my words sink in. I could see some of the employees looking guilty, while others looked uncomfortable, but I didn't flinch. From today forward, we will have zero tolerance for discrimination. It doesn't matter your background, your appearance, or your position in this company. Everyone will be treated with respect, and anyone who cannot follow that standard will no longer have a place here. There was a murmur of agreement, but I could tell some people were still processing what I was saying. I'm not doing this because I was wronged. I'm doing this because I know how it feels to be treated like you don't belong, to be overlooked because of something you can't control. I've been in your shoes, and I will not allow anyone else to experience that in this place. I looked around the room, making sure everyone was listening. Today marks the beginning of a new era for this company. We are going to rebuild the culture from the ground up. All of you will undergo mandatory diversity and inclusion training, and it will not be optional. This is not just about yesterday. It's about making sure that everyone who walks through these doors, staff and customers alike, feels seen, heard, and valued. I could feel the shift in the room. It wasn't an immediate change, but it was a start. The staff who had witnessed the incident were beginning to speak up, expressing their support for the new direction. The manager who had been fired the day before was already a distant memory, and I wasn't going to allow his actions to taint what I was trying to build. We are going to move forward as a team, I continued, and anyone who isn't willing to change will have to leave. This is not a place for those who hold on to outdated views. We are here to create something better, and I'm going to lead us there, together. The meeting lasted for over an hour, and by the end I could feel a sense of relief in the room. It was going to take time, but the path forward was clear. As I walked back to my office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was the first step toward creating the kind of environment I had always envisioned. The work wasn't over, but the foundation had been laid, and I was ready to see it through. The days following the meeting were a whirlwind of changes. The diversity and inclusion training had begun immediately, and the staff were taking it seriously. As much as the shift in culture was necessary, it wasn't going to happen overnight. I had made it clear that this was just the beginning, and the eyes of both the staff and the public were on me. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I was prepared for the long haul. What happened in that restaurant was not just about one incident. It was about the ongoing, systemic issues that needed to be addressed in every corner of my business. I spent the next few days meeting with the head of HR, reviewing the results of the internal audits, and making sure that the new policies were being implemented correctly. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let the hard work I had put into building my company be tainted by those who thought they could get away with mistreating others. On the 5th day after the incident, I sat down with the employees who had witnessed the event. I had already spoken with the ones directly involved, but I wanted to make sure that everyone felt heard. I needed them to understand why this was important, why their voices mattered. We sat in a quiet conference room, and I started by asking them how they felt about what had happened. I knew that some of them had been uncomfortable with the situation but didn't know how to act. The truth was, in moments like this, it's easy to stay silent and hope it will just pass. But I wanted them to see the power of speaking up, of standing up for what's right. One by one, they shared their thoughts, and I listened intently. I could feel the weight of the words they were saying, and it was clear that this had affected them more deeply than they had let on. They were ashamed of what had happened, and they were ready to do better. That was the moment I realized how important it was to foster an environment where people didn't just feel like they had to obey orders, but where they could be part of a team that truly valued respect and fairness. As we wrapped up the meeting, I gave them all one final reminder. You are the ones who will shape the future of this company. Your actions matter, your voices matter. Don't ever be afraid to speak up again. It wasn't just about teaching the staff not to discriminate. It was about creating a space where people felt safe to express themselves, to call out what was wrong, and to make a real difference. I spent the rest of the day in my office, reviewing policies, speaking with consultants, and making sure that the changes were being implemented at every level. I didn't want this to be just a one-time fix. I wanted it to be something permanent, something that would shape the way we did business for years to come. I knew that once the word got out, people would start looking at my restaurant differently. They would start looking at my company differently. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that I had taken a stand and I was willing to follow through on it. By the end of the week, the changes were already starting to take effect. The staff who had been involved in the incident were gone, and a new team was being built from the ground up. The new hires were being trained not just in the usual skills, but in the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The restaurant had become a symbol of change, a place where everyone, regardless of their background, was welcome. As I walked through the dining area later that evening, I could feel the difference. The atmosphere was different. The energy was different. It was no longer just a place to eat. It was a place where people came together, where respect was valued above all else. I smiled to myself as I watched the staff interact with the customers. The way they treated each guest with dignity and kindness was exactly what I had hoped for. It was proof that change was possible, and it was proof that I had made the right decision. The work was far from over, but I was proud of what we had accomplished in such a short time. As I left the restaurant that night, I knew that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. This was a movement, and it was one that I would continue to lead. The future of my company had been rewritten, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. The days that followed felt like a mixture of anticipation and resolve. I spent my time overseeing the implementation of the new policies, but more importantly, I focused on the human aspect of this change. The staff who remained were eager to learn, to grow, and to rebuild trust. I could feel the shift in the energy of the restaurant. The atmosphere was no longer heavy with tension, but instead was filled with a sense of purpose. It was clear that the journey wasn't going to be an easy one, but it was one that would lead us somewhere better, somewhere more aligned with the values I had always wanted to instill in my business. The mandatory training sessions continued, and the feedback I was receiving was overwhelmingly positive. Employees were not only learning about diversity and inclusion, but were actively engaging in discussions about their own biases, their past mistakes, and how they could contribute to making the restaurant a place where everyone felt welcome. I had made it clear that this wasn't just a box to check. It was a process of deep reflection and change. One of the most impactful moments came when the staff started sharing their own personal stories during one of the sessions. Many of them spoke about their own experiences with prejudice. Some of them had faced discrimination in their own lives, while others had been unknowingly complicit in it. The room was full of raw honesty, and I couldn't help but be proud of the progress we were making. But I knew that even though we had made strides, the real test would come when the world began to see the results. A week after the new training began, I decided to meet with some of our regular customers to gauge their reaction to the changes. I wanted to hear from them directly to understand how they felt about the new direction the restaurant was taking. I knew that change wouldn't just come from within. It had to be seen and felt by everyone who walked through the door. When the customers arrived, I greeted them at the door with a warm smile, and I could tell from their faces that they had heard about the recent events. The restaurant had become the talk of the town, and now it was time to prove that we were living up to the changes we had promised. I sat with a few of them at a table, and the conversation started slowly, but soon they were opening up about their experiences, their thoughts, and what they had heard about the restaurant. One of the regulars, an older woman, leaned in and said, "I've always loved coming here, but I have to admit, I didn't always feel like everyone was treated the same. I'm glad to hear you're making changes, but I'll believe it when I see it." Her honesty hit me hard, but I appreciated it. This wasn't just about creating a better place for our employees. It was about showing the world that we were committed to creating a truly inclusive environment for everyone, no matter who they were. I nodded and replied, "I understand, and I assure you that the changes we're making are not just for show. We're working hard to build a space where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. We're not perfect, but we're committed to doing the work." As the conversation continued, the customers started to open up more, and by the end of the meal, I could see the change in their attitudes. They were still skeptical, but they were also willing to give us the chance to prove ourselves. That night, as I walked through the dining area, I felt a sense of pride in what we had accomplished, but I also knew that the journey wasn't over. The real test would come when we opened the doors to the public again, and when our actions, not just our words, would define who we were as a company. I wasn't naive enough to believe that everything would be fixed overnight, but I knew we were on the right path. The culture of the restaurant had started to shift, and with it, the culture of the company. The work would continue, and I would be there every step of the way, guiding this transformation, holding us all accountable, and ensuring that this business became the symbol of what happens when you stand up for what is right. The weeks that followed were a turning point not just for the restaurant, but for the entire company. The changes were beginning to take root, but I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. It was one thing to implement new policies and procedures, but it was another to make sure they were ingrained into the daily culture of the workplace. I had started to hear from employees who felt the pressure of the shift, some of them nervous about what was expected of them, others genuinely excited about the change but unsure how to navigate the new environment. I decided it was time for a company-wide meeting. We needed to come together as a team, not just to talk about what was happening, but to ensure that everyone understood why it was happening. As I entered the large conference room, I could feel the weight of the moment. This was a critical juncture for the company. The atmosphere in the room was different from the last time I had addressed the staff. There was a quiet sense of anticipation, but also a sense of understanding. I stood at the front, looking out at the faces before me, and took a deep breath. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady and clear. "We've come a long way since the events that took place a few weeks ago, and I want to take a moment to reflect on what we've accomplished, but also to look at the work that still lies ahead. I know that change isn't easy, but what we are building here is something worth the effort. What we are building is a company that values respect, equality, and fairness for all." The room was silent as I spoke, but I could see the heads nodding. They were listening, and that meant everything. It hasn't been easy. I know there have been moments of discomfort, moments where we've all questioned if we were doing the right thing. But I want you to know this. The work we are doing is not just about fixing a problem, it's about creating something better. We are not just creating a restaurant, we are creating a culture. A culture that is grounded in fairness, that uplifts every individual who walks through our doors, whether they are a guest or a member of the staff. I want each of you to understand how important you are in this process. You are the backbone of this company, and it is through your actions, your commitment, and your willingness to grow that we will succeed. I paused, allowing my words to sink in. I could see the faces of my employees, some of them still processing the changes, others eager to embrace what was coming next. I knew that some of them were still unsure about the future, but I was confident that they would come around. "This is not just about what we do in the restaurant," I continued. "This is about what we do in our communities, with our families, and in the world. This is about creating a ripple effect. When we show kindness, when we treat others with respect, that energy flows outward. It touches the lives of our customers, and it will touch the lives of those who hear about the work we're doing here. We are setting an example not just in the service industry, but for the world. We are showing that respect and inclusion are not just words, they are the foundation of everything we do." I could feel the room starting to shift. There was a sense of camaraderie, a feeling that we were all in this together, working towards something greater than ourselves. And as we continue this journey, I want you to remember one thing. This is a team effort. None of us can do this alone. We need each other. We need to be accountable to one another. And we need to hold ourselves to the highest standards. Every single one of you plays a part in this process, and your contributions matter. This is our collective responsibility. The energy in the room had changed completely. The nervousness and uncertainty that had been present earlier were gone, replaced by a sense of unity and shared purpose. I could see it in their faces. There was hope. There was determination, and there was a genuine desire to move forward. "I believe in each and every one of you," I said, my voice filled with conviction. "Together, we will make this company a place where everyone feels welcome, valued, and respected. And together, we will show the world what true change looks like." As I finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was real, heartfelt recognition of the work that had been done and the work that still lay ahead. I knew that this was just the beginning, but I also knew that with this team we would accomplish everything we set out to do. We were no longer just a company, we were a movement, and nothing was going to stop us. As the weeks passed, the changes within the restaurant became more noticeable. The staff, who had once been divided, now seemed more united, and their interactions with the customers were noticeably more respectful and inclusive. There was a palpable shift in the energy, not just in the restaurant, but throughout the entire company. I could feel the momentum building, and I knew we were on the right track. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. Change takes time, and I was committed to seeing this transformation through, no matter how long it took. One evening, as I walked through the restaurant, I stopped at one of the tables where a family was dining. They were regulars, and I had seen them many times before. This time, however, I noticed something different. The father, a man I had seen on several occasions, was smiling at the server with genuine appreciation. The server, a young woman who had been with the restaurant for a few months, was engaging with the family in a way that was both professional and warm. I had to pause for a moment to take it in. This was the kind of experience I had always envisioned for my customers. A place where every guest, regardless of their background, felt like they were treated with dignity and respect. This was the new standard I was working to create. Later that evening, I sat down with my management team for our weekly meeting. The tone of the conversation had shifted. No longer was the focus solely on addressing issues as they arose. Now we were discussing long-term strategies for growth and sustainability. It felt like we had turned a corner, and I was proud of the direction we were heading. "We've made significant progress," I said to the team, "but there's more work to do. We can't afford to rest on our laurels. The world is watching, and we need to continue proving that we are committed to this transformation." Everyone in the room nodded in agreement. There was a renewed sense of determination among the management team, and I could tell that they were ready to take the next steps. "We need to ensure that our new policies are not just surface-level changes," I continued. "We need to integrate them into every aspect of our business. From hiring practices to how we interact with our suppliers to the way we engage with our customers, everything needs to reflect the values we are now committed to. This is about creating a culture, not just a set of rules." As the meeting came to a close, I felt a sense of pride in the work we had done, but I knew the journey was far from over. The real test would come when the changes were tested in the face of adversity. I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would always go smoothly, but I knew that as long as we stayed true to our mission, we would overcome any challenges that came our way. That night, after the meeting, I reflected on how far we had come. The road to this point had been long, and there had been plenty of moments where I had doubted myself. But now, I was more certain than ever that we were doing the right thing. I had built this company from the ground up, and now I was leading it into a new era, an era where respect, fairness, and inclusion weren't just words, but the foundation of everything we did. It was a daunting task, but it was one I was ready to face head-on. The next day, I received an email from a former employee who had worked with us during the early days of the restaurant. They had left the company years ago, but they reached out to tell me how proud they were of the changes we were making. They said that they had always believed in the potential of the company, but they had never imagined that it would become a beacon for change. It was a reminder of why I had started this journey in the first place. This wasn't just about making money or building a successful business. It was about creating a place where people could come together, no matter their background, and feel valued. As I read the email, I smiled. It was proof that we were making a real impact and that our efforts were not going unnoticed. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. I knew that we still had a long way to go, but the path forward was clearer than ever. We were building something important here, and nothing was going to stop us. The following month, the changes we had worked so hard to implement began to take root in ways I had never expected. The restaurant, now fully integrated with the new policies, felt different in the best way possible. Employees were more engaged, customers were more comfortable, and the atmosphere was vibrant with positivity. The focus on respect and inclusion wasn't just lip service. It was being lived out every day, in every interaction. I could see it in the way the staff greeted each customer, the way they engaged with each other, and the way they worked together as a team. This was the culture I had envisioned when I first started the business, but now it was more than just a dream. It was a reality. One evening, as I walked through the restaurant, I stopped at a table where a young couple was dining. They were laughing and clearly enjoying their meal. As I approached, the woman caught my eye and smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice warm. "I've been coming here for years, and I've always loved the food, but something feels different now. There's a real sense of kindness in the air, and it makes a difference. You've created something special here." Her words took me by surprise. I had always believed in the potential of this place, but hearing it from a customer, someone who had witnessed the transformation firsthand, made it all feel so much more real. I smiled back at her. "Thank you," I replied. "That means a lot to me. We're working hard to make sure everyone who walks through these doors feels welcome and valued." As I continued walking through the restaurant, I couldn't help but notice the small changes that had become part of the fabric of the place. Employees were engaging more with customers, making sure they were comfortable, asking if they needed anything. There was a genuine warmth that hadn't been there before, a sense of belonging. It was clear that the new culture was starting to take hold. Later that evening, I sat down with my management team to review our progress. We discussed the feedback we had received from customers, the improvement in employee morale, and the ongoing training that had been integrated into every aspect of the business. We were on the right track, but I knew there was more work to be done. "We're seeing progress, but we can't stop here," I said, looking around the room. "We need to continue pushing forward. We need to keep raising the bar, not just for ourselves, but for everyone in this industry. We have a responsibility to lead by example, to show that businesses can thrive while putting people first." There was a quiet nod of agreement from the team, and I could feel the sense of collective purpose in the room. We were all in this together, committed to making the restaurant and the company a place that stood for something much bigger than just profits. "We're not done yet," I continued. "The work we've done is just the beginning. We need to keep focusing on what matters: the people, the employees, the customers, the community. We need to make sure that this culture of respect and inclusion is not just a phase, but a permanent part of who we are." The team was fully aligned with the vision, and I could tell they were eager to continue pushing for more. I had always believed in the power of people, but now I saw it firsthand. When you build a company with integrity, when you lead with respect, the results speak for themselves. That night, I left the restaurant feeling proud of the work we had done, but more importantly, I felt excited for what was to come. The future was bright, and I knew we were just getting started. As I walked out into the cool evening air, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. This journey had been about so much more than just a restaurant. It had been about changing lives, about proving that we could create something better, something that would last. The work wasn't over, but it felt like we had finally reached a place where we were making a real difference, not just in the business world, but in the hearts of those we served. The restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a symbol of what happens when you stand up for what's right, when you make the decision to lead with integrity and compassion. It had been 2 months since we started the transformation, and the results were beginning to speak for themselves. The restaurant had gone through a complete overhaul, not just in terms of policies and procedures, but in the very culture of the business. I had witnessed firsthand the change in the employees' attitudes, in the way they interacted with customers, and most importantly, in the way they treated each other. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was far better than it had been before. What started as a reaction to a single incident had turned into a movement that was shaping the entire company. As I walked through the restaurant that evening, I could feel the difference in the air. The space that had once felt tense and unwelcoming now felt warm and inclusive. The staff greeted me with smiles and genuine enthusiasm, and customers seemed more comfortable, more at ease. The energy in the room was palpable, and it wasn't just about the food or the ambiance, it was about the people, the culture, and the respect that flowed through every interaction. I stopped by a table where a family was dining, and the father, a regular, smiled at me. "I just want to say," he began, "this place has really changed. It feels different. And honestly, it feels good. It feels like we're not just customers, but part of something." His words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt a sense of pride wash over me. This was what I had worked for, not just to create a successful business, but to create a space where people felt valued, respected, and seen for who they truly were. As I continued walking, I saw another customer, a young woman, speaking with one of the wait staff. She looked up, noticed me, and smiled. "I've been coming here for a while now," she said, "but I've never seen the staff so happy, so engaged. It feels like the restaurant is actually listening to its customers now." Once again, I felt that familiar sense of pride. These were the moments I had hoped for, the moments when I could see that the work we had done was making a tangible impact. But I also knew that the true test of our success was not just in the positive feedback we were receiving, but in how we responded when faced with challenges. Change, after all, wasn't just about doing the right thing when everything was going well. It was about staying true to our values when it was hard, when we were tested. The next day, I received an unexpected email from a former employee. She had worked with us during the early days of the restaurant, and although she had left the company years ago, she had been following the news about the changes we had implemented. Her message was simple: "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you're doing. This is what leadership looks like." Her words gave me a renewed sense of purpose. I had been doubting myself at times, questioning whether we were doing enough, whether we were truly making the difference I had envisioned. But this email reminded me of why I had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about the recognition or the accolades. It was about making sure that the restaurant became a place where everyone, no matter their background or appearance, felt welcome and valued. That afternoon, I met with my leadership team to discuss the next phase of our plan. We had made great strides, but there was still work to be done. We needed to ensure that the changes we had implemented were not only sustainable, but were continually evolving to meet the needs of our staff, our customers, and the wider community. "We've come a long way," I said to the team, "but we need to keep pushing forward. We need to build on this momentum, keep raising the bar, and continue leading by example. The world is watching, and we can't afford to be complacent. We need to continue creating a culture where respect and inclusion are at the core of everything we do." The team nodded in agreement, their expressions a mixture of determination and resolve. I knew they were ready for the next challenge, and I felt confident that we would continue to succeed. As I left the meeting, I reflected on how much we had accomplished in such a short time. There was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, I felt truly hopeful about the future. We had made it through the storm, and now we were building something that would last. This was more than just a business. It was a movement that would change the way people thought about respect, inclusion, and leadership. And I was proud to be at the forefront of it. As the weeks passed, the changes continued to take root. The staff's behavior was shifting, and I could feel the transformation in every corner of the restaurant. But with success came more challenges. It wasn't enough to simply change the atmosphere within the walls of our establishment. Now, we had to prove that these changes were lasting and not just a temporary shift. I knew it wouldn't be easy to maintain this new standard. There would be those who doubted us, who would question our commitment, and those who would try to resist the cultural shift we were implementing. But I was prepared. I knew that leadership required consistency, and that was something I was ready to offer. One afternoon, I sat down in my office, reviewing the feedback we had received from customers and employees. While the response had been overwhelmingly positive, I couldn't ignore the fact that there were still areas in need of improvement. It became clear to me that while we had succeeded in changing the culture within our restaurant, there was still work to be done on a broader level. As I scrolled through the comments, I came across an article that had been written about the restaurant's transformation. The headline read, "A New Era for Dining, One Restaurant's Commitment to Inclusion and Respect." The article praised our efforts but also pointed out that true cultural shifts take time and require constant vigilance. I paused for a moment, reflecting on the point the article made. Change was never a one-time event. It was an ongoing process. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. I made a decision then that we would start a public campaign that would not only showcase the changes we had made, but also keep us accountable. It would be about more than just attracting customers. It would be about creating a movement that spread beyond our restaurant and into the community. I wanted to make sure that the message of respect, inclusion, and leadership wasn't just something we talked about behind closed doors. It needed to be out in the open for everyone to see. The following week, I met with the marketing team to discuss the new campaign. "We need to create something that goes beyond traditional advertising," I said. "We need to show people the human side of this change. We need to show the world that we're not just about the food we serve, but the values we stand for. This is a long-term commitment, and I want everyone to know it." The marketing team immediately began brainstorming ideas, and we decided that our campaign would highlight real stories from our employees and customers, showcasing how the cultural changes were impacting them personally. The idea was to create a narrative that people could connect with on a deeper level, a story that reflected the true meaning of the transformation we had undergone. It was important that we didn't just tell people we had changed. We needed to show them in ways that resonated. By the time the campaign launched, it was clear that we were starting to gain traction. Our social media platforms were flooded with comments from people who had experienced the changes firsthand and wanted to be part of the movement. Local businesses began reaching out, asking how they could incorporate similar practices into their own operations. It was more than just a restaurant transformation. It was a cultural shift that was gaining momentum. The next few months were a whirlwind of interviews, community events, and continued employee training. We weren't just leading a company, we were leading a cause. We had created something bigger than ourselves, and the impact was undeniable. I started hearing stories from other business owners, from people in the community who had been inspired by what we were doing and wanted to make changes in their own workplaces. It was proof that the ripple effect I had hoped for was happening, that our message of respect and inclusion was spreading far beyond our four walls. I wasn't naive enough to think that there weren't still challenges ahead, but I knew that we had built something solid. We had created a culture that valued people, and that was the foundation of everything we would do moving forward. It wasn't just about being a successful business. It was about creating a legacy that would outlast any one person or moment. This was bigger than me, bigger than the restaurant. It was about changing the way people thought about business, about leadership, and about respect. As the months went by, the momentum continued to build. What had started as an internal change to improve our company's culture had turned into a larger movement. It was more than just a transformation for the restaurant. It was beginning to shape the way businesses in our community operated. The campaign had gone beyond anything I had expected. Our story of change was being shared not just locally, but across the country. Businesses, schools, and even community organizations reached out to ask how they could implement similar practices. What started as a shift in a single restaurant had grown into a broader discussion about leadership, respect, and inclusion in all industries. It was an overwhelming realization, but also one that made me proud. We had started a conversation that needed to be had, and now it was snowballing. One afternoon, as I was reviewing some of the feedback from our public campaign, I received a call from a major industry leader. She was the CEO of a chain of restaurants across the country and had heard about what we were doing. She expressed interest in meeting to discuss how we could collaborate on a larger scale. My heart raced as I listened to her speak. This was the opportunity I had hoped for, but it was also a huge responsibility. If we could influence even more businesses to adopt the principles of respect and fairness, the impact could be monumental. I agreed to the meeting, and within a week, we were sitting in a conference room with representatives from her company. They had already begun to implement similar policies in their own restaurants, inspired by our success. "What you've done here is nothing short of incredible," the CEO said, her voice filled with admiration. "We want to partner with you to take this movement nationwide. We want to work together to help businesses across the country build more inclusive cultures." The meeting lasted for hours, filled with ideas, strategies, and plans for how we could work together to spread the message of inclusion and respect. It was a conversation that left me feeling both excited and humbled. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. We weren't just changing the culture of one restaurant or one company. We were laying the groundwork for a shift in the way businesses operated across the country. The days that followed were filled with planning, meetings, and brainstorming with teams from both companies. It was a partnership I had never expected, but one that felt right. We were aligned in our values, and together we could amplify our message. In the months that followed, our joint efforts led to a series of workshops, seminars, and public talks aimed at educating business leaders on the importance of creating inclusive cultures. We collaborated on research and created resources that other companies could use to implement similar changes. What had started as a reaction to a single discriminatory incident had now become a movement, one that was making waves across industries. As I sat back and reflected on everything we had accomplished, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This journey had been filled with challenges, moments of doubt, and setbacks. But it had also been filled with triumphs, growth, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. I had started this journey wanting to change my business, but it had turned into something much bigger. It had turned into a legacy, and as I watched other businesses begin to follow our lead, I knew that this movement was just beginning. There would be more work to do, more people to inspire, and more businesses to lead into a more inclusive future. But as I looked around, I could see the impact we had already made. The future was brighter than ever, and it was only just beginning.